I'm the guy that puts a 2-minute delay on the first step just in case. And I still look at that turn on button and I'm like,
hey, Sprocketeers, it's your boy, George B. Thomas, and we're back with another interview. Although this one's a little bit different because have you ever been kind of going around in life and you heard somebody say something, it like just snapped in your brain and you're like, man, I wish I could dive just a little bit deeper into that person's brain. Well, I was actually having a conversation with Remington Begg from Impulse Creative, and he mentioned the words automatic versus automated when we were talking about marketing automation. And so I want to bring him on today and I want to talk about this conversation, this automatic versus automated. But first of all, if you have not met Remington Begg is the Chief Remarkable Officer at Impulse Creative. He loves to walk with his sons. He loves beach life and boating. He loves to binge watch shows with his wife, Rachel, who is co-owner of Impulse Creative. And listen, he does a lot of meetings, a lot of coaching. The fact that I have him here is amazing. We actually got the calendars to align. But Remington, what I want to do is I want to dive in. I want to break down the two different words in your thinking and kind of get a foundational layer for the folks, the viewers, the Sprocketeers on this whole thing in your brain around automatic versus automated. So when we're talking about the conversation of, marketing automation or automating things, and we're talking about automatic versus automated, let the viewers know what you mean when you actually said to me, automatic.
I think that marketing automation, sales automation, business automation in general is like sought after right now. Everyone's trying to be more efficient. They're trying to be more intentional with their time, and they're trying to push things through the tech. It's a amazing time to be a marketer to be able to allow that happen. And there is, in RevOps, there's ways that you can streamline processes for both sides. I think as marketers, as RevOps professionals, as business owners, we throw around the term automated when there is more to just automation. It's, do you automate to enable someone, or is it truly automatic, meaning like no human interaction? I think that's the two big things. And so realizing and asking the question, if someone asks you to automate something, like, is this automatic or is it automated? And there it is for you, right? Is what parts of this process are we automating, or is this whole thing automatic? And there's a lot of different questions that have to be asked depending on which path you choose.
So let's do this, because I know my next question, I want to go into like, when you talk about automation, what do you mean with automating? But do you want to share maybe where this epiphany came from? Like what was happening, what was going on? And then you were like, oh, because I think the viewers, the listeners will actually be able to be like, oh my God, I had something very similar to that. And two, because you kind of leaned into questions. So maybe wax poetic on that for a little bit.
Yeah. So vulnerable, being vulnerable for a minute, right? The vision of how we have things as strategists, as, automation professionals, as RevOps specialists, is we have this vision of what we think we can build and how it should be. And I think that when we are communicating to mere mortals, we'll say, that we're having conversations on the other side, and those conversations are talking of the same thing, but have very different intentions in regards to what the end result looks like. So that goes back to the question piece. And so the situation we ran into is I was spending hours and hours trying to figure out the last 10% of this problem in regards to, like, it was a very significant workflow that was bouncing between in HubSpot for automating courses and certifications and making this whole flow come back through to notify the user. And I lost sight of the original ask. And the reason is I was trying to make it automatic and was struggling with that last 10% to make it automatic, when that was never actually the job. The job was to make it more automated, #more automated than what it was currently. And so in this example, if someone went to an event and they needed to send out certifications, they'd have to send out these certifications manually. And the system that we created is literally making it so that it would be automatic, is where I was going for. But in all reality, that last 10% could have been done by a human and taken 1 second per 100 contacts instead of 10 to 15 minutes per contact. I wasn't happy because it wasn't 100% automatic, like nothing had to be done. That was like where I had to pause and reflect for a minute because I was delaying a completion of getting something done for a client, but they'd never actually asked for it to be hands-free automatic. So that's the scenario.
So it's interesting because when you got it more automated instead of automatic, the client was like super happy. Yes.
Yeah. Like once they're like, oh, wow, this goes from like a full day's worth of work to a 15-minute task. I'm pissed off that it's a 15-minute task. Meanwhile, they're excited that it's a 15-minute task. Right. And so if we think about that, there's a lot of that last 10% might be worth shaving off, but like we also don't know exactly what are all the variability in that last 15%, which is part of the reason why we're struggling. Realizing that and holding ourselves accountable to like solving the problem and like having some plus ones is probably a good idea. But yeah, it was a good internal win. It was a good internal like DiNozzo smack in the back of the head if you watch NCIS.
Oh yeah, see there's that binge watching stuff with
there you go,
your wife Rachel right there, pulling it into the interview. So just so we don't lose anybody along the way, for the next question I ask, I do want to go back kind of 50,000 foot, because you did kind of talk about when you say automatic, this is what you mean. And when you think of like automated, because by the way, viewers, listeners, I mean, Remington's been using HubSpot for, I think it's 12 years. He's owned his own business for 15. He's probably one of the most in the weeds, nerdy HubSpot guy that I personally know. So when you think about automated and what you can do in HubSpot and what companies should be focusing on, like unpack that part of your brain for a little bit.
I think that there's tasks that are monotonous in CRM and data collection, and there's indicators of success and or failure, or there is flags that need to be raised when certain things happen or don't. For instance, if someone doesn't pay their bill on time and you say 15 days is how long you want to give a grace period, on day 16 something should happen. That should be automatic. A human shouldn't have to do something to alert the customer that they're late. But in some cases, they do want that to be there to be a human in the middle that actually does that phone call or makes that step. When I look at RevOps in general, it's trying to enhance the customer experience, but not at the expense of the employee experience. So when we think about automation, and this is showing my age on the HubSpot, from a HubSpot ecosystem standpoint, when 1 + 1 = 3, that's really what we're talking about here is like, what can we automate? What can we enable in the process? And the stuff that can be automatic and is very intentional and more transactional in nature, let's make it automatic so no human has to be in the way. But let's make it so that they have time to spend time on the stuff that matters, the customer success, the overall experience. Let's make that part easy. And I have an example of that. We just moved someone off of Salesforce over to HubSpot, and we built out this LMS dashboard for them. And they were like, we'd really like to be able to update the status of this area here on this page. And we're like, press the edit button. Now, that I can't even take credit for that. That's a HubSpot page that just allows to be edited. But the backlog of what was in that client's head was their experiences that they had previously about the amount of effort it took to make an update to a homepage or a dashboard for one of their customers. If we can streamline those pieces, that all of a sudden they're not doing data admin and they're not dealing with what should happen. Now they're making changes on the fly to make their clients happy. There's ways we enable that experience. And then there's ways that they get really stuck in the weeds. And the goal is to make it less in the weeds so they can focus more on experience.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff happening right here because you've talked about kind of like the 90% automated so you can focus on the 10%. You've talked about the historical, like this is what the, client or what the human being's brain thought the process would be like versus what it could be like. Yeah, difficulty versus ease. There's just so much here, which is why I'm excited to ask the next question, because I think you can take what you've talked about automatic and automated and really bundle that now into a package of is it really versus or is it actually contained? But more importantly, from a high level, why is this conversation of automatic versus automated important to the businesses who are watching this right now in 2022 and beyond?
To answer that tail part of that question first, I think it's because, and I've done it too, we superimpose those two, but they're very much different. If your automation has to pause so that a human could do a task and then it has to kick up again, like that's not automatic. Now it is doing things automatically, but it's not actual automatic. And if a business has the expectation of making something automatic, what is it replacing? How is it replacing? While if we're thinking about how to automate a process or do things in an automated way, then we got to think of how it enables and helps the customer, the employee, the CEO, the HR professional, whatever the methods are. It's really around enablement rather than replacement. And I think that's a big thing that when we have an ask, that's really important. HubSpot has a way to send automatically the reports of stats based on their dashboards. You can automatically get that in an email. What you can't automatically get in an email is a human summary of that report on that time frame. That action of the human has to be what triggers the dashboard to be sent. And that's the difference between automating the actual reports that are sent based on that video being created, for instance, versus them getting an email at 8 a.m. on Monday that says, here's your reports and statistics.
So it's interesting. My brain is going sideways as I'm kind of like listening to you unpack this. And so I want to ask the question now because there's always been this thing of, well, if we like marketing automation, let's automate it. We can automate it. And we've kind of at Impulse Creative, me personally, Dan, the learning ops team, we're like, well, just because we can automate doesn't mean we should automate. And so now we're talking about like automatic, making things automatic or automating things. And so my brain went to like, well, gosh, how do you know even if something should be automatic or if something should be automated? And if it's even a good idea to do either of those? And where I lean into is you said earlier in the interview, the importance of questions. And so just unpack like this idea of like, should we always be thinking about making things automatic? Should we always be thinking about automating them? And are there some good questions that we should be stopping and asking ourselves to like actually make the right smart decisions as we move forward with these?
Yeah. So the first questions are like, where are you dragging an anchor? I'm a nautical guy. So like, where is it a sea anchor? Like, is it over and it's supposed to slow you down? Is that intentional or not? You know, where's the features and the bugs? I find that there is a lot of opportunity if we look at a cost standpoint, not to replace a human with automation so that human can be fired, but so that human can be uplifted into doing things better or more effective, is there's things that they do in their job that are not as fulfilling, but also like humans can make marginal errors. And so like, what are those errors? There's always going to be that. But if we go into a situation, here, I'll give you an example. So we have a client that, or a prospect that we're talking through, and they want this big flow of automation to happen. And they want to connect to one of their other tools. And so I said, okay, so what's the trigger that you would need to actually like make this sequence of events happen? There was a dramatic pause. And then they said, it depends. And I waited and I said, on what? And they're like, well, I'm not exactly sure. That's red flag number one. If you don't know what the trigger is yet, you cannot automate that bleep. Right? But on the flip side, you've got, there's going to be some actions that need to happen. And I feel like automation today, just because it can be automated, it shouldn't be. And, George, we've had this conversation around Impulse even is, sure, we've got this thread and it's based on timeline in a lot of cases. What if someone wants to consume content faster and you're sending it every 2 days? But what if they can't consume it as fast as you're sending it? There's no real understanding or like high level of bet that you would raise to say, yes, this is when they want it. And I think that if you don't know the answers to some of those questions, you can run into some potential issue on how to automate or what to automate versus enabling the experience. And I think one of the big things with automation is people think time-based. And they think about time-based first because time-based automation is the oldest kind of automation that we've had. The difference between Amazon's automation that they do and, you know, a MailChimp automation is it's not action-based. So for instance, it was time to order dog food the other day, and it wasn't a 30-day drip for us to order dog food from the last 30 days. It was the distance between the 2 times when we ordered dog food the last time. That's me and how fast I was gonna say we eat dog food, how fast my dogs eat dog food. But it's one of those things that is intent based. And I think that as we think about that automation and how things are automatic, we need to really hone it back and understand, do we actually know as a matter of fact the actions and what the end result should be? And if there is variance, and I mean variance beyond the if then, like if they like coffee, send them a coffee gift card. If they like donuts, send them a donut gift card. Like if they like both, then send them to Dunkin'. Whatever those things are, you are probably going to have an other bucket. And your automation has to be as intentional about the other as it is the condition.
So much good stuff. I mean, my brain is like going nutsoid because it's like this intention based, and then there's even engagement based. And when you were talking about your dog food and Amazon, my brain went to this place of like, oh my gosh, like most people are going off of like this date property. But what if you had this date property and the history of it actually engaging with like a HubSpot calculation to figure out it's like 25 and a half days, right? 25 and a half days, not just every 30 days or whatever it is. So much good stuff there. Honestly, Sprocketeers, you might want to rewind that portion and just kind of re-listen to it. But Remington, question here, because obviously you help a ton of clients, you know, paid and free, like you're in, you know, the HubSpot forums and, you know, different Facebook groups. And so you've heard and seen a lot of this. What are some of the historical problems that you've seen businesses make that might be listening right now, whether it be around this idea of automatic or automated or the versus of the, like, what's the hurdles, the potholes that you would want to warn them about, or, you know, say, look, if you see this, watch out for this, those types of things?
Yeah. So when you're building a workflow in HubSpot or any workflow for that matter, you should not have your workflow with predefined triggers already in the workflow. You need to build the meat before you figure out who's going to eat it. That's probably one of my biggest tips is you need to be as intentional about the targeting as you are the content. And that's for 2 reasons. One is context matters when someone gets an email, but it definitely matters if they're in a thread of 14 emails. But more importantly, there's a lot that you could get wrong in workflows and in automation. We've got another client that we were helping out. Their workflow, they want to go to their most engaged leads, and they've got like 12 criteria for the identifying all the different ways that they're engaged leads. And one of their last criteria is not in this workflow. Well, that last rule supersedes all the rest above. So anyone who's added to their CRM dropped into this workflow that talks about why you should trust said company. And that can be pretty damning. You're saying, trust me, but you're also like, you don't know me because it's the second you're added to the CRM. It could be a subscription. It could be a CSV upload. We still do those, right? It could be, you know, they attended an event or they did a phone call or whatever those things are. You got to be really intentional about the triggers. The other thing that you got to think through is, and this is probably more of a disease than anything. I view everything as workflows like this, like trying to understand all the different pieces that are weaved together. If this workflow was like exploded out, like we're Iron Man and we're like zooming in on our thing, should anything else be active if this workflow is on? If the answer is yes, then great. If the answer is no, then make sure those rules are set for the rest of the ecosystem. So that's another one. And then finally, goals. Nothing drives me crazier than workflows that don't have goals associated with them. You want someone to do something by the time they get to the end of the goal. The goal should not be that they got to the end of the workflow, by the way. The goal should be that they took action or did something because of the workflow. And goals are incredibly important, especially in HubSpot, because they also stop the workflow from continuing. And that's a feature that I think people overlook pretty heavily.
It's so, again, like, man, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've gone in and like there's no goal. And the goal, it's funny, the reason that that's so important is because it's literally the measurement of success or failure on the things that you're actually doing. Like, if you know that it's only 52% or 23%, then it's like, man, we got to look at the subject lines and the call to actions in the email. And if the tasks are actually being completed that are automatically being added to the, like there's all the things you have to pay attention to. And you literally like, no, we never set a goal. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, because when we're doing onboarding and Impulse Creative in the workflows, it's like naming conventions, goals, descriptions, like all these things that everybody wants to forget about and just go to that stinking trigger immediately is like, come on. You were going to say something, Remington?
Yeah. So with Operations Hub too, I wanted to bring this in. You can do a lot of good with a workflow, but you could also do a lot of bad. With great power comes great responsibility. Operations Hub is a new feature that HubSpot has, a new hub HubSpot has released, which allows for you to get ultra technical with things. We're talking some magical stuff, like the custom coded workflow actions you do anything. Your world is your oyster from an automation standpoint. What's fun about that is the conversations we're having about what people are trying to accomplish. And I think that the big thing is, like, a workflow does not have to be complicated. I have many workflows or automation that are 1 to 3 steps, and they are great, and they help out with a lot of enabling the rest of the team to do things. There's value in those workflows. They don't have to be huge lists. I saw one that was like 65 steps that we went through, and we were like, how would you measure the effectiveness of this workflow? And so I think it's just really important. But the custom coded workflow actions reinforce why you need really good documentation. And that's probably the other pro tip, is use those comments like crazy in the workflows. Like, you got a little comment box that you can do on every single one of your steps, your actions. If you're linking to a webhook and that webhook's in Zapier, drop the link to that Zapier in there. You'll thank yourself when you come back there next year and you try and figure out what webhook that goes to. Give yourself some breadcrumbs, because it's gonna be hard for you to come back to that, but it's gonna be even harder if someone's your predecessor is trying to look that stuff up too.
Yeah, the you in 2 weeks, 2 years, or the 2 people after you that get hired are
or
going
me in 10 minutes. Let's be honest. Me in 10 minutes is not going to remember where I was 10 minutes ago. So but yeah, it's documentation is super important, and I think that is probably one of the most misunderstood pieces. Is like, why does this workflow even exist? Yeah. What was the overall intention about it in the first place? But goes back to asking the right questions, understanding how the things flow, and like what those order of operations are.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're a young Sprocketeer watching this, you're like 10 minutes. Trust me, the older you get, the worse it gets. You want to leave that for yourself. Trust me. So Remington, here's the thing. One of the ways I'd like to ask this question is almost like in a checklist style, right? Because you've listed a lot of great nuggets. People should rewind and rewatch. But if you had to think about this in a way of getting started, and it was a 3, 4, 5, whatever point kind of checklist, like, what bullet points would you give people to get started in the right direction with, automatic or automated, in their business?
Who's it for? Who's the first question?
Oh, like asking me who's it for, or them asking who's it for?
That's question number 1.
Gotcha. So start with questions, right?
Yeah, because you have to answer these questions, right? So when we talk about marketing, we talk about buyer personas and like, who are we speaking to and what are we doing? With workflows, like, you're really building a product with every workflow you do. And you got to think through, like, how do people buy or how do people use products? Like, there's a user story. And it goes back to, we've got our chatbot course that we talk a lot about, like, what's the user story of that individual user and the chat that they have to go through. And it's the same kind of thing with the workflow. Like, who is this for? And then that could be a completely different question, is who's going to see this, and what object are we going to change, and what's the outcome that we're expecting. And then you get into who needs to know about this, meaning who needs to get notified in a lot of cases. And then ultimately, how do we measure success? Now, all of those are before we even build the workflow, the first step. And then once you start getting into the workflow, again, I'm a big proponent. Start with your steps. Make sure that you have your email copy written. Or if you don't, HubSpot's got a new feature where you can drop your actions in and then come back and connect the emails. But build out your infrastructure. And then as you're going through, know that you're going to change 50% of it. How would you build it differently, knowing that you're going to do that? And a lot of that comes into, it might be having 4 different workflows that trigger each other, or it could be having areas that are measured in between. But go through and think of those actions, and then be very, very careful with your if-then conditions. I'd say probably 80% of the time when I look at if-thens, the other. So if these 3, and then it's everyone else. Other is almost always blank. That's just the end of the road. That's if your GPS was and turn left, and the left is a cliff. That's what happens in that workflow. Technically, it's a completion of your workflow. Is it intended to be? And then finally, look at your triggers and figure out who your triggers are. I'm a big fan of building triggers for workflows. If it's contact-based or company-based, building those triggers in a list first, so I can actually see the humans or the organizations that would be in that automation. Before you set your triggers, turn your workflow on and push one contact or company or deal or service that should go a certain way through it. And you can enroll them manually. And if that works the right way, then go back and build out your triggers, because you only have one chance. And over my career, I've seen a lot of people that have accidentally pressed publish, and it enrolls the entire database if their triggers are wrong. You're going to want to be very careful about that, because that can be, if you have an immediate step that goes right into enrolling everyone. Wow, 33,000 people just got this email that says draft. You don't want that to happen.
Yeah, that's definitely an oh crap moment. Without a doubt. And you always hate to send that secondary email of sorry that we just did this thing. And of course you try to make it cute and have a GIF or a GIF. We're not going to have that conversation, whichever one you believe the way you want to believe, of somebody throwing something through a monitor. So it's just never.
I'm so scared. I'm the guy that puts a 2-minute delay on the first step just in case. And I still look at that turn on button and I'm
Yeah. And you've been doing it for years. That's the thing. You've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
And I will say, Sprocketeers, one of the things that I love a lot of what Remington has had to say, but I want you to rewind to the point where he started to talk about your workflows in a modular mindset, where you could have 3, 4, or 5, and they're working together, and one's enrolling into the next, and not needing this 63-step workflow that when it breaks, you have no reason or understanding to how to fix it or why it broke. Remington, you've added over 30 minutes of value to the community today in this interview. I have one last question for you. Then I'm going to give you the opportunity to let people know where they should connect with you if they have questions, or what you think next steps on kind of learning about this or engaging would be. But are there any, and by the way, this could be based on automatic, it could be based on automated, it could be based on just your general world beliefs. That's dangerous, giving you that option. But anyway, what is last words of wisdom that you would share with the Sprocketeers before we let them get back to their regularly scheduled days?
Automatic or automated, I think if you're trying to streamline process and stuff for your team, less is more to start. Start out things that enable the team to do well and do recon. And what I mean by that is if you have an onboarding process that's 12 emails that the sales team or the onboarding team are sending, and you're relatively sure, and I'm using that word intentionally, relatively sure what should be the content of those emails and what the steps should be, make a task for the person to send that and watch the email that is sent for some time, and come back 30 days later and look at that workflow and go, of the people that sent the emails, like what was the variance between them? I would rather you spend 30 days with enabling and giving tasks for people to send an email and knowing that the task happened and have the message right based on 30 days worth of good data than a guess that could affect customer experience. So less is more there. The other thing is, remember that workflows and automation is more than email. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. Like there's like a 92-step workflow that we went through and nothing updated in the CRM about progress. Like no field was updated, no interest was marked, nothing automatic in the workflow would change anything in HubSpot. And so think about the humans that are on the other side receiving those messages, and think about the humans on your team who could be looking at that contact record. They're not going to be able to be as sleuthy as you, knowing that they're in step 47 of 90. Put some flags in the sand in your CRM so that they can see that too.
So much good information. Listen, Sprocketers, just rewind. Watch the whole thing over a second time. I'm telling you, there's so many nuggets that you could pull out, so many notes that you should be taking. Remington, if people have additional questions, like where do you want to send them? What are the next best steps for them to move forward with?
Yeah, so hit me up on Twitter at RemingtonBeg. You can hit me up on LinkedIn as well. You have to use the code Remarkable if you want to get in my emails. I'm pretty aggressive on not accepting anything that doesn't seem like a real human. Hashtag enemy of automation. But the other thing is too, we have an incredible team at Impulse Creative. So if you tag at Impulse Creative on Twitter, you reach out to anybody on our team. I don't do this near as much as the rest of the team these days, and they surprise the crap out of me in all the best ways. So reach out and we can help, but do not hesitate to reach out, because I'd rather tell you all the bumps and bruises I've had rather than you having to live them yourself.
Yeah, without a doubt, folks, we are here to add value to your life. A couple things that I want you to think about is should it be automatic? Should it be automated? And are you asking the right questions to go in the right direction? And think modular, think team, internal and external communication. And while you're thinking about all that stuff, rewinding and watching this video again, remember to be a happy, helpful, humble human. And of course, we'll see you in the next interview.